Alright, so now that we got, in our last video, we added some rotation to our little end goal warp hole thing here. Um, so I thought this video it might be nice to, one, give our player a little bit more personality, and two, sort of improve the win state of getting to the warp hole, and two, the fail state of hitting the side. So right now we have the colors turning red and green if we win or if we lose. But what I would like to do is to have his face sort of grimace or get knocked out when he touches the side, and also add like a screen shake effect to really sell that this is a bad thing when you're hitting the sides. And then for the warp hole, for when we win, I'd like him to look happy and to like rotate around a bit and stuff like that. So I've already made a few new sprites that I'm going to use. We're going to create a new animation for our little guy over here, and I've made a few sprites that I'm just going to import in here. And that is his little eyes here, so I'm going to put that into sprites, and it's given us sprites, must be detected. That's nice. So what first I'm going to go into player, and if you look down here, if you don't see it, you can go to window and open the animation tab, Control 6. But we're going to start creating a new animation clip for our character. So anytime you do a new animator, I like to make an idle clip, even if we're not going to actually be changing anything. That way, when we look into our animator over here, our idle is set to be our default animation. So this will play at the beginning of the game until we tell it not to. But so for idle, I don't really want to change anything, but I do want to create a new clip. We call it KO, or knocked out. Yeah, maybe better. Knocked out. Save that. And I also want to create another one, which is going to be happy, because he's going to look all happy when he's won. So you can see these two gray animations. They're not default. That's why otherwise they'd be orange, and there's no way to get to them yet. So we'll come back to the animator in a second and do that. So let's look at our knocked out animation. I like to drag this here. Let's do it like this. I like to look at our animation window and our project separately, because I need to drag and drop stuff from the project sometimes. So so the animator has already been created for our player, which is great, as well as different animations. We can organize this into a new folder. We can call this animation. Let's put this in the assets folder, and let's put all the animations and the animator into the animation folder. Okay. And we're going to look at our sprites. So we're going to do knocked out. So anytime he gets hit, we're going to call this animation. And basically I want to change the irises in his eyes to just be X's. So I have that sprite here. And so I'm going to go into the player and make sure that's selected, make sure knocked out. I'm going to add a property, and I'm going to look at his eyes. I'm going to check his eyes, and basically going to go down the hierarchy like you go down here, and find what's called Doodleman Iris. So add a property, and I want to change the sprite of Doodleman Iris. So Doodleman Iris. There's a sprite renderer. And then we can change the sprite here. It's kind of annoying if you're too down in the hierarchy. You won't be able to see this option, but you have to hit plus for it to actually work. So, or actually, maybe an easier way to do this is if we hit undo and we go into record mode. And what that does is that it sort of records any actions we do to the player, and we can just change his sprite from the inspector window. So if we just drag it here, then his X, and then it's automatically recorded in the animator. So that's in the animation. So that's great. For the next Doodleman Iris, I'm going to drag and drop that other X, and we'll stop the recording. So if we go to idle, he's fine. If we go to knocked out and hit play, then it turns to X's. So that's what we want. That's how we want to do it. For the happy animation, we'll do the same thing, except for I don't want to change his iris. I want to change the whites of his eyes. So I have this sort of makes him, looks like he's got cheeks and he's got like happy eyes or something like that. So we'll do the same thing. We'll hit record. We'll go to each one of these, the whites of his eyes, and drag in the new sprite. And then stop recording, and if we travel back and forth and hit play, then he's got happy eyes now. Cool. Now I need to tell the animator when to trigger this. So we'll do this in the player controller. So we can double click this and open it up. And to be able to do this, we need to sort of declare it at the beginning of the script. So, oops, I'm just going to do an animator. Yeah, animator anim. Just call it anim. It's kind of my go-to for talking about animators. And what I'm going to do is when the player wins, I want it to be happy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another function that can be called by the warp hole that can tell us like when we've won. So I'm just going to call that win, not win zone. Oh, void win. Yep. So that's our new function, and we're going to tell the animator to, I'm going to set a trigger, and we're going to call that trigger win. Okay, so a couple more steps. So in the animator, we want him to be happy anytime the win states happen. So we'll go onto our parameters here. There's a layers and parameters, and we want to add more parameters, and we'll add a trigger. So anytime we call this trigger, it's gonna do something, and it has to be the same spelling as what we've said in here. Okay, we're gonna set a trigger win. And so this is, so in the animator you could say if we want to call this at any point in time, no matter what animation state it's in, you can call it from here, and you can make a transition to happy. And we'll say let's make him happy under a condition. So we add a condition, and it automatically detects that we have win here. So that's perfect. So anytime we hit the warp hole at the end, then it should declare that we've won and we'll be happy. And I like to, you can see that there's sort of a transition here, so kind of like scroll through here and like, do we want this to transition from one to another? Like if we hit play, But I think I just kind of want it to be immediate, so I'm going to have no transition duration. Just make it be immediate. Sometimes we might want to transition. While we're here, why don't we do the same thing for knocked out and make another trigger, and we'll call it fail. So he's going to go into the knocked out state anytime he hits the side of the wall and it hits fail. So we're going to go 0, and we're going to go and there's no exit time. Great, happy, knocked out. So now what we need to do is we need to make sure we've got win here, and we also want a fail. So if we fail, this is in the player, we want to set a trigger. It's the same name as we had before, which is fail. And now it'll send a message to our animator to change the state. But now we need to call these functions, and we're going to do that. We're going to have warp hole anytime. We've already sending a message to the game manager to say to win. Now we just need to tell the player the same thing. So we're going to find player instead and send message win. Or actually, we already know that the game object is the player because we're checking that the collider tag equals a player. So we can just say we know the collided object is a player, so why don't we send the message to that? Let's test that then. Do maximize on play. Let me see if I can get through the whole map. It's going to be embarrassing. All right. This one turn I made too fast. All right, cool. I'm going to hit pause. Okay. Okay, so we got a null reference. Set trigger. What did I do wrong? Oh, okay. So I haven't. Big deal. So I've declared an animator, but I didn't say what animator this was. So in our start, as soon as the scene starts, we want to say that anim is get component animator that's attached to this object. Now we won't get that reference, but it looks like it should work now. So if we retry this, exit out of the console, clear this, and did I save? I probably didn't save. Okay, I did. Sometimes my shortcut doesn't work. Ooh. There, he's happy. Next, I want to make him sort of rotate and shrink into like the warp hole. I think that would be cool. So what I'm going to do is when he wins, let's actually, yeah, let's do that now. When he wins, I'm going to make him rotate, and I'd like to do that in update. So how I'll manage this is that I'm going to have a bool. It's going to be bool win, and then we'll say that's false to start out with, and then we'll set our bool when equals true over here, and if we've won, this is where we'll do our rotate and shrink. Otherwise, I want him to sort of stay in place and not keep moving in the cursor position. So we will could say as long as he hasn't won, we can do all of this stuff. The scroll wheel, the rotating, because we could alter our rotation here too. So, and then make this a tab, all this. We don't want to include the escape because we want that to happen anytime. Or do we? If it's 1, probably not. We probably don't want to pause the game if he's 1. So we'll tab that over too. Okay. I want to just reorganize this, and so as long as he's not 1, he can do all this stuff. Else, if he has 1, that way we don't even have, we can ignore this. As if this always goes through, then we don't even have to check the if statement here. We'll say else if. Then we're going to make him rotate and shrink. So we're going to we'll set our we'll find, this is a player controller, so we can take the transform and rotate, just like we did with the warp hole. We can do rotate around. I'm just going to copy and paste that. But we don't need ring 1. We just want our transform, and we want it to rotate around himself, and on the same axis as the warp hole, so that's fine. We could set a variable for how much we want him to rotate, but we can also just set it in here, as long as it's going to be the same the entire time. Just try something like 100. Alright, so he's going to rotate. Now we just need to make him shrink, and we can do that with the transform 2, and we'll look at his scale. So we can do local scale. Local scale is this here. That's what we'll be sort of modifying, and I want to take whatever scale it's at now, and I want to shrink it down. So sorry, slurping my coffee. So you've heard of like plus equals. This time I'm going to multiply it by a scale, and it's going to incrementally shrink, multiplying it lower and lower. So what we're going to do is take local scale, multiply it by something. We'll do lerp. So we'll linearly interpolate his scale, and so we're taking the vector of the local scale and we're multiplying everything by 1 number. So we're going to multiply that vector by if we look at lerp, it interpolates between a and t, so we'll multiply it by 1, so we'll keep the vector the same, and then we'll shrink it down basically to 0. And we'll do that by a float of time dot delta time. And oops. And let's try that out. To test this a little bit easier, I think I'm going to just sort of not do the game manager so the camera doesn't move right now, and then just move both of these kind of where we want them over here. I need to make sure that the player doesn't touch it immediately when he spawns, so let's try this. Okay, that was weird. Oops. Let's move the camera. Can I do the camera like in the middle here or something like that? I just don't want him to touch. He's already touching. I need to move the player too. Move him here and see if. Okay. And now we can test, and he drops down for some reason. He's on the player controller. He's rotating around. Let's see if it's scale or position. Oh, we have an error here. Let's see what the error is. Oh, it's complaining because I turned my game manager off. Okay. And I wonder if that's why it's effing up. No. No, that's not it. Okay, I figured out what it is. So I'm gonna uncomment this and then make sure that's fine. So what's happening is it's this part of the code here. When I'm not overriding the position, if he's not 1, then it's gonna revert to using the rigid body, which I set a gravity. Well, I didn't set it. It's just automatically the gravity scale is 1. So just to make sure, we need that to be 0 so that the rigid body doesn't fall down when he's rotating and when he is shrinking. So now when we test it, since there's no rigid body, he'll sort of shrink in space. The last thing I want to do here is I want him to go into the warp hole, not just like at the moment that he touches the warp hole. So what I'll do just quickly is I'm going to look at the warp hole controller, and we've already sent a message to say he's 1, but we're just going to snap that position to the warp hole position. So we say the collider dot transform dot position. We'll set his position equal to transform dot position. This is the one that's connected to the warp hole, and now when we test this, he should move into the warp hole. So when he's like going into like the black hole sort of thing. So cool. That warp hole looks kind of funky. Alright, we'll worry about it later. Alright, so the next thing I want to do is I'm going to turn my game manager back on, make sure that's back on. I want to do his fail state, so I'm going to do a very similar thing as I did in the warp hole controller in the map controller. So we're detecting anytime we've collided with a player. Now we're going to send the player a message, dot send a message. Oh my gosh, send a message, and it's gonna say fail because that's the name of our function in our player. I think we'll need to say game object dot send message. This is collision, so it'll work a little bit differently than our trigger. I guess we can send message fine with the trigger, but not so much with collision. Weird. Okay. The more you know. Alright, so now we should get the player. We've already done our animator, right? So anytime we've hit the sides, his eyes should sort of, turn into X's. One thing is that, like, well, we can set these positions back to 0. Great. So that we're starting at the start point again. One thing is that it reloads the level so quickly that we don't have time to actually show the player anything about the fail state. So what we're going to do is in our game manager, we're going to we've already sent a message saying we failed, and then we immediately load a scene. But instead of that, this function is going to call another, it's called the IEnumerator. It's a coroutine, and coroutines are nice because you can specify things in a certain amount of seconds. So we'll call this reload level, and anytime you do IEnumerator, it's going to complain that like it doesn't return a value. So you need to basically do something like this: yield return. It's got to return something, a new wait 4 seconds. We're specifying how we want to return, and we can return by 1 second. Try that out. So yeah, and after 1 second, then we want to actually load the scene. So I'm just going to cut and paste that there. Then we're going to reload our scene, and then in our fail, we're going to start our coroutine reload level. Cool. And now let's see if it gives us 1 extra second. Yeah. So it takes a second. One thing we're noticing is that I can still move the cursor around, and that's because remember how we said like as long as we haven't won, we want to change the cursor position. Well, I want to say as long as we haven't won and as long as we haven't failed. So I'm going to do a second bool called fail. And then we're going to set fail equal to true when we failed. And now, as long as it's hasn't won and it hasn't failed, then we can move our thing around. So let's try that. So, yep, our player stays in place. But our camera keeps moving, so we can sort of do the same idea in our game manager. We don't want to move our camera if where's it at? If we failed. So what we can do is so we already have this if statement. This is when we want to do the whole moving the camera thing. So we have one condition, but we can add a condition. We can say that, hey, as long as it's not failed, then you can do this. But if it is failed, we don't want to move the camera anymore. And so how we'll do that is we already have this fail. We'll set a new bool here. We'll make our public, we'll just do here bool fail equals false, and then we'll set fail to be true when we've hit this. So we'll just immediately have the camera stop when we failed. Okay. That's a little static, a little stagnant, like not really a lot to it, but it would be nice if we did a little screen shake like I mentioned before. So why don't we do that? We can how do we want to do it? We want to, so we failed, and so we're detecting if it's if we want to move it to the next target or not. So we can say, all right, else if it actually has failed, else if It really did fail. Then we can do our camera shake here. How we're going to do that is we will remember how we ping-ponged the color of the background. Well, now we can ping-pong the position of the camera. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the camera position to be equal, we'll make a new vector, vector 3, and we will do, I kind of want to make it shake in the X and not in the Y, so I'm going to do, actually first before we do this we need to sort of record the position in which we've crashed. That way we can shake around that position. So in our fail, I can set and we can save a vector of where our position is. So I'll declare something up here. Let's call it crash position. In our crash position, we're gonna go here and we'll do crash position equals the position at which we failed. So we're calling it when we call fail. And we only call this once, so this shouldn't really update. And now we can say we want the cam position to be the crash position dot x, the x value of that, and we want to add to that our ping pong value, and maybe we should declare well, this will be time.time, and we want the maximum that it changes position to be whatever this float value is. Maybe we should declare a variable here that is going to be our speed of shake. So we can make another float here, target range, let's just do comma, screen shake speed, and then so we'll multiply this value by whatever we set that in the inspector. So we've got our X, and now we need to make sure we have our Y, and we can just leave the same crash position dot Y so that it doesn't move around. Now if we have failed, the position is going to be set on update to ping pong its position from +1 to the crash position. I kind of actually want to do, I want to center the crash position, so I'm going to subtract the crash position by whatever half of our position that we're adding to it. So we're basically, this is the same way as things like subtract 5, add 5, or 0.5. So we're centering the crash position a little bit more. Alright, so we will, let's check that. Alright, if fail equals true, got another error. Bool fail equals false, calling fail, reload level, color red, fail is true. Make sure this is being called print. Yep, it is. Oh, you know what? I know what it is. I need to go, and we made these new variables and I didn't change them. So the screen shake speed is multiplying it by 0, so it's not going to do anything. So let's do something. Let's try 20 or something like that. So if we add, okay. Right, one thing I think is that we're doing it too long and like shaking a little too hard. So I'm going to just modify this a little bit. I'm gonna do like half of the length that we're shaking. Do a float. Anytime we don't do an integer for the float, we have to like put an F behind it. And everything is good, and I think we'll reload quicker, so we'll wait for less time before we reload our game. So let's try it. Okay. It's kind of like operation style, like it gives us a little buzz of hey, you hit the wall wrong. Okay, that's nice. Adds to our game feel. I'm gonna just delete this nasty print because that doesn't do anything. Okay. One more time for fun. Okay. And that's it for this video.